students, I want you to pay attention to me here, like all of you, like please listen to me with this. So one of the most common questions that I get from folks is, hey, Todd, can, tell me if, tell me what you think of this idea. Tell me if you think that this is a big idea. And so there's a couple things that I want you to understand. Number one is that I may not be able to tell you what is a big idea or not, because again, remember that a big idea, you need the context of the marketplace to know whether you have a big idea. See, because like one of the very first things that I would need to know, which you'll know, but one of the very first things that I would need to know in order to know if it's a big idea is, has this been said before, right? Has somebody else said this, a variation of this, right? Have they said this just maybe with different words, different terminology, like, but has this been said before, right? And if I haven't done the research personally, right, and I don't know the answer to that, I can't tell you whether it is a big idea or not. The other thing is that, right, like in line with that is, if I don't know the market, like if I'm not in tune with the market, I may not know, right? There's a great likelihood that I'm not going to know what are the fears, what are the desires, what are the emotions that the market has to know whether the promise that you're making them in the idea, whether it's an explicit promise or an implicit promise, whether that promise is what they really want. And so I share that because it's near impossible for me, unless it's a market that I'm intricately involved with day to day, to be able to tell you like, yes, this is a big idea. More often than not, the best thing for you to do, the absolute best thing for you to do, right, is certainly, right, as long as, you've done your research, you've done your examination, right, is to then, when you develop ideas, there's a couple things, right? Number one is I always want you to, and listen to me carefully here, okay? I want you to think of ideas as if you were pitching an idea for a movie, right? And so if you're pitching an idea for a movie, and so you're not sharing the title of the movie, right? You're not reading off dialogue, and you're not kind of giving me like the subtitle, of the movie or the tagline. Like, you're going to share the idea. See, one of the big mistakes that marketers make when they start to learn about the big idea is when they go to quote unquote pitch the idea, whether it's to me, to themselves, to somebody else, to a group, to their fellow E5 marketers, whatever it may be, to our top one mastermind folks, they end up writing copy first, meaning they end up writing a headline, and then they share the headline as if they were sharing the idea. But what they're really sharing is an expression of the idea, right? See, so a headline is the words that you've chosen to express an underlying idea, right? So you could have, right, like let's say you've got this idea of how to grow tomatoes, right? And so the absolute simplest way to express that, the simplest headline that you come up with could literally just be how to grow tomatoes, right? And so, but you could also say how to grow big tomatoes, how to grow big red tomatoes, how to grow gorgeous tomatoes, how to grow juicy tomatoes, right? Those are all different ways of expressing the same underlying idea. Underneath those different headlines, how to grow big tomatoes, how to grow huge tomatoes, how to grow big gorgeous tomatoes, how to grow how to grow humongous tomato, whatever, right? Like those are all the same idea. Wordsmithing it, changing the words that you're using, right? In the, how to grow big tomatoes, how to grow huge tomatoes, how to grow monster tomatoes, right? Those are all the same. That's all the same idea. That's all the same idea. It's just wordsmithed differently. It's just communicated slightly differently, right? Like, and there's lots of different ways to communicate the same idea. I'm sharing that in this context because it's important for you to understand that you want to share the idea. You don't want to share your first stab at copy of the idea. You don't want to share your first stab at a headline for the idea. You want to just share the idea, right? Like you want to share the idea. It's why really, this is a side tip that you guys and gals should all use, right? That if you're going to share your ideas with let's say other members, other E5 marketers, in whether it's or if you're top 1 members, if you're on the Facebook our private Facebook group, or in Slack, whatever it may be. Here's one of the things that I would recommend you do. I would recommend that you record an audio explaining the idea, a 15 to 20 second audio explaining the idea. And I'm going to tell you how to explain it in just a second. And the reason why I say that is because I don't want you to try to translate the idea into a headline, because that's a different step. That's a different step in the process, right? You don't write, it's like this. You don't try to write the title for your book until you know what the book is about, until you have the idea for the book. You don't try to write the title until you have the idea for the thing. Right. And so, because it becomes nearly impossible, right, to try to write a great title until you know with clarity what the idea for the book is. And so you want to get clarity on the idea first. What you don't want to do is you don't want to try to get clarity while you're trying to write copy at the same time. Because what you come up with is a muddled idea that is communicated with subpar copy. And so the point being to all of that, the reason why I'm sharing that with you is because what ends up happening is you could have a decent idea on your hands, but because it's communicated as a headline, right, that idea could get lost in poorly written copy. Right? Like, it's kind of like saying, you could have a great idea for a movie, and if you choose, like, if you came up with a title and the title of the movie is just crap, right? Or you have a great idea for a book, but the title of the book is just crap, and you've asked somebody to judge the idea based on the title that you've come up with. Well, now they're really judging it based on the title. And so that good idea could get lost in a garbage headline, a garbage title, and so on. And so you always want to start with just share the idea and treat it as if we are at a social gathering. We're hanging out at a party, right? It's a cocktail party. We're hanging out, and you come over and you say, "Hey, Todd, I got an idea I want to share with you. Like, check this out. What do you think of this?" Boom. You don't read copy. You right? Like, you're not going to say, "I got a great idea, right? What do you think of this?" And then you're not going to read off a headline. Who else wants to become a millionaire by blah, blah, blah. That's not what you're going to do. You're going to pitch the idea. You're going to pitch, like, the narrative. You're going to pitch the idea. Like, "Hey, man, I discovered this way that you could actually learn piano, right? Like, within 6 minutes or less, just by putting one thing in your left ear." Like, okay, well, now, wow, okay, so you got my attention. Tell me more about that. That's what we're looking for, right? That's what it means to pitch an idea. And so, excuse me. So that's the very first thing that I want you to recognize. The second, there are 2 other things, and then we're gonna go in and we'll take a peek at we'll take a peek at this. More than likely, we'll spend some time looking at the unique mechanisms. And so the first thing is that, and this really comes right from my buddy Joe Schriefer, that you want to do is you want to be able to express what is the ordinary idea, like the ordinary version of your idea, and then what is the big idea. Like, if you had to boil it down to, like, the ordinary version, right, is like, whatever, a guy gets mugged, a guy gets mugged on the way to, work, and it ends up, like, ruining his day, right, or something like whatever, right? Like, that's, an ordinary. Well, what is the extraordinary idea? Okay, so that's the ordinary idea, the ordinary version of the idea. If we brought it, to the market, they will have heard it already. They will have seen it already, right? They're aware. Like that's the guy gets mugged on the way to work, and, like, it totally ruins, like, it ruins his life, right? Well, the extraordinary thing could be, like, that this guy who is he's a scientist, and on his way to work, he gets mugged, and they steal his briefcase, which has his plans for a nuclear reactor, blah, 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 whatever. And it ruins his life because he gets, put in jail or whatever, right? Like, in other words, what's the ordinary version of the idea and what is the extraordinary version or the big version of the idea? The last thing that I'll tell you for how to kind of begin to kind of look at your own ideas to give you great insight into whether you've got a big idea or not, is just go down the list of criteria and ask yourself one at a time, does this meet this criteria? Like, right, like one of the very first things that you know, like, right, so typically and you don't have to have every single one of these criteria, but certainly the more of them you have, the bigger the idea in essence. But number one, like I always ask myself, like, is this different, right? Is this different? Am I saying something different? Am I saying something unique, or is this something that the market has heard before? Because if the answer is yes, the market has heard this before, right? A variation of this, something similar to this, no, then it's not a big idea and I get rid of it. I won't continue with that. And so it's got to be, right, like, is this right? Is this different? Is this unique, right? I always, right, like, is there a promise, right? And this is not one of those mandatory, but is there a promise built in, right? Is there a promise of benefit, a promise of result, a promise of transformation, whether that promise is explicit or implicit, right? Does the prospect see it and feel like, okay, there's a payoff? And is that payoff something that they desperately, right, that they desperately want? Right? Am I conveying that there is a unique mechanism? And really what I mean in this context is, like, am I conveying that there is a unique way that they're going to experience the result, the transformation, the promised outcome, right? So, like, do they have something to hang their hope on, right? Something different to hang their hope on. And so, right, that is what makes it emotionally compelling. Is there an intellectually interesting component to this? Meaning, like, is there any aspect of this that feels like this is a news story, that feels like, why haven't I heard this before? That feels like a discovery, that feels like I just stumbled on something new that I'd want to hear more about, even if there was no promise tied to it, or right, or if there was only an implicit promise tied to it, right? Is this fresh? Meaning, will the prospect see this as something fresh and new, not old? Right? Does this feel like it is dated? Right? Like, the other thing is, another piece of criteria is, like, does this give the prospect a reason to engage with the marketing right now? Right? And let me clarify that. I'm not saying, right, I'm not talking about giving them a reason to respond to the offer right now. That's different, right? Like, I'm not talking about scarcity, urgency with the offer. That is different. That's when you're putting together the offer, you want to give them a reason to respond. I'm talking about when they come across your idea, is there any aspect of that idea that gives them reason to engage with your message now? Is there, or can they put it aside for the next 3 weeks? Can they save it to Evernote and then come back to it in 3 weeks, or forget about it, right? Or are you giving them a reason to engage with your promotion right now, right? Is there specificity to the idea? Like, is it something that they could picture in their head? Right? Like, is there something that they like? Is it specific, or are you being vague? Right? Because many of you've heard me say, the longer you've been around, right, there is no, vague generalities don't sell. Specifics sell. Vague generalities do not. And that's because specifics are credible and believable. Vague generalities are not.